Sam Conn Jr., theathletic.com, joins us on 365 Sports. He's made his rounds throughout the state of Texas, covers college football, and joins us. Craig and Paul, David Smoak on 365 Sports. Sam, in your opinion, of all of the programs, you've been to Houston, I know you were at Baylor, TCU, among others, is there one particular story that really is the one that's the most unique or the one you remember the most? And I know that's asking a lot.
I think the most fascinating one to me is actually right where you guys are, is at Baylor. And I wrote about that on Monday, about the situation with Dave Aranda coming back for a fifth year and the experiment. And I know we've all talked about that at length, but it really is fascinating to me because it is the first year of the new Big 12. It's a really important season. This is a program at Baylor that has won at a high level for more than a decade, multiple conference titles, played for another. And I think it's just such a huge pivotal year for them to get back on track. And if you don't, it's not to say that you're going to fall behind, but this is not a time that you want to be behind the eight ball with everything changing so rapidly in the college football landscape. And Dave, going to be a full-time defensive coordinator essentially, and all the staff changes that he's made and all the different things that are going on there in hopes that it works. To me, of all the programs in the state this year, that one is the most intriguing to me for that reason.
Sam, I thought it was really interesting that you pointed out, not only, obviously Gary Patterson joining is a big story, but you also got in there as far as the folks who assume that he's just going to be the next guy up for Mack Rhoades if this Aranda situation doesn't work out. And I was kind of wondering how, even though it was Aranda's choice to bring him in, and they obviously have a good relationship, you do wonder, and a guy's on a hot seat, and here's this other former head coach, just how that dynamic is going to kind of work. But I feel like Mack Rhoades, put any flickering little flame that might be growing there, he kind of put that to bed, didn't he?
Yeah, it was very interesting because I had the same question that everybody else did, was, is this going to be a situation where if things go sideways, this is the guy that's going to be your next head coach? And I don't think it's going to be the case. And Mack had said that they had to talk through that, but he wanted to make sure Gary Patterson's motives were pure and that he was there to help Dave, not help himself, so to speak. Obviously, Gary, I don't think there's any secret, would like to get back into it. Just talking to people in the industry and other colleagues that I know that have just kind of covered the coaching searches, it was no secret that after his time went up to Texas that he was definitely interested in getting back in. I think he loves football, and I think he still loves the game. And I'm sure there's a bad taste in his mouth about the way it ended at TCU. Certainly had a great career there, but I'm sure there's a chip on his shoulder about wanting to prove himself again, even as the sport has rapidly changed. And I think Mack was very cognizant of that and wanted to make sure that what Gary's going to bring is something that helps Baylor football and that helps Dave Aranda and helps this program elevate. I would be really surprised if things were to go sideways. I would be surprised if Gary Patterson ended up being the next head coach. Even I would be surprised if he would even be the interim head coach. If I had to guess, if we got to that point and they made a change in season, I would guess Jake Spavital would probably fit that bill just because he's been in that role before as a head coach more recently.
Sam, they had to check a lot of boxes in the offseason. It was new offensive coordinator, a new system, new position coaches, new players, Dave Aranda taking a firm hold of the defense and probably calling that. Of all those things, they've checked boxes, but the one that they won't really answer is, are the players they got better than the ones that they're replacing? And that is where they'll probably be on pins and needles, right, until the season starts.
No doubt. Absolutely. That's ultimately what it comes down to. Every change you make in the off season is all well and good. The scheme change and the coaching assignments and the coaching staff and the recruiting strategy, all that stuff is great. Doesn't matter a lick if the players aren't better because they did not look good last year. And there's no way to get around how bad they looked at times. To lose to 5 Big 12 opponents by double digits at an average of 25 points. That's just the ones that were not the one-score games. That's a large margin, and to do it that frequently was alarming. And so that, I think there was a recognition on Dave's part, on Mack's part, that they needed to upgrade the talent. And I think they've done a good job. I start with quarterback. Like DeQuan Finn, I thought was a terrific ad. I think Ashton Hawkins was a terrific ad. I'm really intrigued by Michael Trigg, the Ole Miss transfer tight end. He's a big body who can really run. I think they did an overall good job. I just saw they got Colton Thomason, the offensive lineman from Texas A&M recently. I think he's a talented guy. I don't think he gets to play as much over there, but I think that's an intriguing ad up front. So I think they've done a good job in the portal. But yeah, you just don't know. This is a new offense. There's 6 new position coaches. That's new sets of standards for everybody and getting acclimated and all that stuff. And that's hard on players. I've talked to lots of players who've gone through coaching changes over time, over and over and over. And this, of course, is the Baylor staff that has changed over a lot. I think I counted 17 position coaches that have changed out in the last 5 years. That's a lot of change, and that's difficult to deal with as a player. So it does come down to how do they perform on Saturdays. But I do think that I have to give some credit to Aranda for recognizing, even though I know it sometimes probably gets annoying for the fans that every year something's changing, Dave's not changing just to change. Dave is changing because things aren't working. And I think his ability to recognize that and pivot when necessary is commendable.
Well, we had him, or we were given the opportunity about every other week and one-on-ones. He came in our studio a little bit after they made the decision he was going to come back, or when Mack Rhodes made the decision he was coming back. But he's not doing a lot of interviews. And that's kind of part of the job of a head coach. And that's fine. Last year wasn't easy to get those, to do those interviews. Do you feel like he's tightening it up and going bunker mentality a little bit too much?
No, not at all. Just because I've seen this before at other hot seat situations. This is kind of how it goes sometimes when you get into a hot seat situation. Coaches know that all that matters at the end of the day in keeping their jobs is wins and losses. That's all that's going to matter. If Dave does all the PR and gets fawned over for all his quotes all year, that ain't going to matter a lick if they're 4-8 this year. And so he's going to focus on what he wants to focus on from a football standpoint. And let's be honest, you guys have been around him. He's really thoughtful. He's really intelligent. He's great to talk to. But I think anybody who's been around him would say he's a natural introvert. He doesn't love the PR part of the job. When he was at LSU, they didn't really make coordinators available at LSU. He was able to kind of just lay back and be in the dark room and do his thing. And I think that's his comfort zone more than being the outward face of the program. I found it really interesting. I spotted this last week when they did a YouTube video of the tour of the Fudge Center development this spring, and it wasn't Dave doing the tour, it was Jake Spavital. And I found that really interesting. I said, wow, you got the new offensive coordinator doing the tour of the new facility and this guy's only been on the job for a couple of months, but that's the thing is Jake, that's very natural to him. To Dave, it doesn't seem like it's natural. He's just a different cat, and there's nothing wrong with that. Ultimately, he's not going to be judged on the PR person that he is. He's going to be judged on how good his football team is.
Sam Kahn, theathletic.com, with us on 365 Sports.
Sam, what are you most curious to see going back to those players that will maybe spark? Is it DeQuan Finn? Is it someone else?
Yeah, I think it's Finn. Just, obviously he did really well in the MAC, MAC Player of the Year. You like the resume, 7,000 passing yards, tons of touchdowns, dual threat. And I don't know, in spring ball, and, I went up there and watched practice. When you're not hitting the quarterback and it's not live, you kind of can't get to see that other element of his game, his ability to kind of make things happen and be that 11th player that the defense has to account for. And I want to see what that looks like in the Big 12. And I want to see what that looks like in Jake Spavital's offense, which anybody who's, followed his career knows that offense is pretty productive. He did a good job at West Virginia. He did a good job at Cal. Obviously, Texas State didn't go as great as a head coach, but I think the offensive scheme part is good. And so I want to see how that comes together. I want to see how good they are up front also. I want to see how good they are at blocking and tackling. Those things. And then, of course, just defensively. With Aranda calling it, I went and looked at the numbers. And he was at LSU. They allowed less than 5 yards of play. I think it was 4.8 or something like that, 4.7 in 4 years there. Last year, Baylor allowed 6.5 yards of play. That's a huge difference. And so with Dave calling it now, are we going to see something? Obviously, you don't have LSU players of the late 2010s, but are we going to see something of that ilk, a much more stingy defense that doesn't really give up as much on the ground or in the end zone?
It seems like it's been kind of quiet around TCU, and obviously it was so loud around them when they made the great run to the national title game that was a little bit overmodulated, and then kind of coming back to earth last year, but still disappointing because I don't think they imagined they were going to take that big of a step back. I haven't heard a lot of noise about them this offseason per se, Sam, but is that a good thing, do you think, just to kind of go behind closed doors and not have that attention?
Yeah, I think so. And look, I think that season was a really rude wake-up call for them. In Sonny Dykes, even when I visited him this spring, he admitted that, we probably took for granted that the culture would carry over. After everything that happened in 22, so many of those guys were veterans. So many of them were experienced and have played together. And some of the new guys that came in, or maybe even the young guys that didn't play as much who were on the team as returnees, maybe probably too easily assume that they're just going to have another successful season just because they showed up. And maybe that the staff should have done a better job of instilling that culture and making sure that the standards were met on a day-to-day basis in that program. So it seems like, to me, they are laying low a little bit. I look at the schedule, and I think it's really intriguing for them. I don't think it's overbearing by any stretch, and they look to me like a team that, if they get things right early, they could get off to a hot start. But that's a team that I still, when I watch them work out and I watch them walk around, they still got a lot of talent on that roster. I think it's a matter of, does the personalities fit? Is the discipline there? Are the standards being held and met on a day-to-day basis? If that happens, this can be a good program. But I do think they probably took for granted the success that they had in 22, thinking that, hey, we're still going to be good in 23. I think they thought, and I thought too, they would start 6-0 last year with their schedule. And that Colorado game that we all remember that kind of started the Dion phenomenon, I think that was a wake-up call for them and everybody in that building. And I think I wonder if that was a little bit of a hangover throughout the course of the season for TCU.
Sam, does the Big 12 have, in your opinion, a team, a program that can separate itself this year and into the future, maybe one or two, or are they going to be more like an NFL-type conference or division where it just constantly churns itself from top to bottom?
I tend to think it's going to be the latter, the more NFL style. I just think the separation from 1 to 16 is not really that large when you talk about from a budget standpoint, from the level and rankings that these teams are all recruit at. There's not a lot of separation in that. I think what you're going to see is you're going to see tiers of teams. And so when I think of that top tier, I'm going to think of Utah. I'm going to think of Kansas State, Oklahoma State. And then we're going to find out this year, can Baylor, who has been in that top tier before, can they get back into it? TCU, who would have been in that top tier 2 years ago, can they get back into it? So that's the way I look at it. I don't know if there's going to be one alpha dog in this league. I guess if I had to pick one, if you made me pick one, I'd probably pick Utah just based on Kyle Whittingham's track record of finding talent, developing talent, and putting out consistent winners at Utah. And even that feels hard for me to say because this is a new league for them. This is a new challenge. Everything's different. How is that going to go? I mean, conference changes are not easy. It's not to say that the football is any different, but you get in a comfort zone. You know, Utah's been traveling all this time to Washington and Oregon and a bunch of schools they're not going to travel to anymore. Having some of the schools that they have played in the Pac-12, I think it will be a help. But I just wonder what that adjustment's going to be like. But they're the program that in recent years I think has been that standard bearer, and I think they have the chance to be. And then other ones, like I said, Oklahoma State I think is in that conversation because of what Gundy's accomplished. Kansas State looks like they could be on the way with Chris Kleiman and what they're doing over there, and they've done a good job of recruiting and developing. And like I said, we mentioned Baylor and TCU. They've shown in the past they can do it. Can they do it again and get back into that tier? What
do you feel the mountain is to climb for Arizona State as they come into the league?
I mean, for one, I think it's just talent and youth, and they've got a really young coaching staff. I like the energy with that group. I think they did a good job of putting it together, but I think it really is just a talent standpoint. And they've also got a lot of catch up to do from everything that they've dealt with in the last few years with, after the Herm Edwards era ended and the, penalties that they got from the NCAA from all the stuff that happened in the Herm Edwards era. That's a little bit of shadow to climb out from. So I think that's a little bit of a challenge for them as well. And to me, that's a program that I think has so much potential, and you wonder how come it hasn't really been realized of late. I remember in the late 1990s in the Jake Plummer era, them playing in a Rose Bowl. It was this is a program that I think does, when you think of the location, the recruiting base that they have from a location standpoint in the state of Arizona, not far from California, they do come reach into Texas. I think there's still potential there. In Dillingham, I like them a lot, but I think talent's the one thing is you got to make up for, and two, I think it's just trying to get that program on solid footing, a solid foundation, which I don't think they've had for a little bit.
Sam, back to the Baylor article, and then thank you again for your time, as always, when we get you, is that one of the things that was, to me, unique and also jumped out at me, because we knew going into West Virginia to end the year, they played pretty well. Hell, they had the lead, and then they gave up the long pass and eventually lost the game, was that Aranda met with Mack Rhoades the day of that game. Because he knew, everyone knew, but he met the day of that game, that morning of the game, and laid it out. And then, of course, in the last drive, I asked him, he was in the studio, did you have your headsets on for that last drive? He said, yes. Did you communicate with your defensive staff? And I believe he said, no, I did not, which was one of the issues. Was that a little bit kind of, wait a minute, you're meeting the day of the game, or was that just him wanting to get proactively ahead of the curve?
I was definitely that caught my eye. That intrigued me when I heard that, because I've never heard that happen. That most of these meetings almost always happen after the season is over. Normally the day after the season or 2 days after the season, whatever works for the AD and the coach. The fact that it happened the morning of the game, and it's a night game. We all, for those who don't know, there's a lot of sitting around in the team hotel on a night game. Night games sometimes are my favorite because of the atmosphere, but sometimes it could be my least favorite because you're waiting around all day for kickoff. And so there was plenty of time to get that done. They did it late that morning, and Mac told me that was Dave's idea. It was Dave's idea to do it before the game. I think it was probably a smart idea because I think he knew that if they didn't win that night, that there was already a bad mood festering around the program in terms of the way that season had gone. And to make that impression before you kick off and show, here's what I'm going to do to make the program over and change everything and get us back on track, I think it was really smart on his part. And obviously it worked. It made a really strong impression on Mac and Javon Overshone and everybody in Baylor leadership. And I think they still believe in him. But it was fascinating to me to hear that. But also, and I think you've heard this, Smoak, from Mac. Mac's a believer in you don't just wait till the end of the season to have your big meeting. Mac and Dave had meetings multiple times throughout the course of the season as the season went sideways to talk frankly about the state of that program. So it wasn't like they hadn't had that conversation already, but it was Dave's formal chance. In some ways, I call it, and I think Mac even said it too, it was almost like a scaled down version of a job interview. Mm-hmm. He came in there with, his presentation and papers and all that stuff. And just like you would when you do a job interview with an AD, you have a bunch of notes and you have stuff that you want to present for what your vision is. This was Dave presenting his vision for what Baylor football would be if it changed under him, if he got another year, and it worked. So I did find that to me was one of the most fascinating parts of that experience. And like I said, it's going to be fascinating to see how it all unfolds. Thank you.
I know you have other things to write. I hope you have time to take a little bit of break because Max Olson takes vacation all the time. So, just kidding.
I will. I promise. Sometime in June, in July, I will definitely take some time off. But I appreciate it.
We'll see you. Are we going to see you in Vegas?
I don't know. We still got to figure that out. We haven't talked about media day travel yet, but yeah. I would guess so.
Well, I would guess so. We're going to try to make sure we're there too. Sam Codd Jr. does a great job covering college football for theathletic.com. We appreciate his time. Around the corner,